Commissioners Board Work Session. It is Wednesday, July 13th, 2022. It is 2:32 p.m. This is set to go until 3:30 p.m. This is a hybrid meeting. We're in Building 1, Room 280. For public virtual attendance, you may follow along on the Thurston County YouTube channel. I'm Carolina Mejia. I'm the Chair of the Board, Vice Chair Ty Menser, as well as Commissioner Gary Edwards joining me in the boardroom. We have County Manager Ramiro Chavez, Assistant County Manager Robin Campbell, and Chris Chapeau from our Community Planning and Economic Development. Joining us today for our Community Planning and Economic Development Department 2022 Conservation Features Application. So with that, who's taking it off?
So Chris is going to take the lead on this, and Andrew joined us via Zoom. I think he's going to drive the PowerPoint. But if you need help on the PowerPoint, Andrew, let me know and I can pull it up for you. Hopefully it won't take an hour. I think it's only scheduled for 30 minutes on the master calendar, so the agenda is a little bit off. So
okay.
If Chris can go through that in 30 minutes or less.
Andy's going to go through the PowerPoint presentation. This is an annual briefing to the board on the Conservation Futures Grant Program that CPED coordinates and runs on behalf of the board. Andrew's going to go through the grant applications that we received this year, the ranking, and ask for a decision point at the end of this half-hour briefing. And if there's any questions, we'll go over those at that point in time. So Andy, you want to bring up the PowerPoint presentation, please?
Yes. All right. Are we seeing the PowerPoint?
Yes.
All right, great. Okay, well, good afternoon, commissioners. My name's Andrew DeFobis. I'm a senior planner with Thurston County Community Planning. I'm here today to brief you on the 2022 Conservation Features Application Cycle. Did that advance?
It did not.
Okay, hang on.
Oh, it started out so smoothly too.
I know. I had a last minute weird thing with my computer and it's on two different screens. So let me try to stop sharing and share the other piece of it. Alternatively, I could let county manager run it if that would be better.
I'm here to help.
Okay. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my share and let you do that, and apologize. This ran great in the dry run. Okay. So do next slide when you're ready.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so the Conservation Futures Program is a land preservation program for the protection of open space, timberland, fish and wildlife habitat, and agriculture and recreational land in the county. The program is governed by RCW 8434. The county collects a property tax levy from taxpayers to fund the acquisition of land or conservation easements on land. And in 2022, that rate paid by Thurston County taxpayers is 3.2 cents per $1,000 assessed value. The board allocates each year $500,000 for that annual project award cycle. Next slide, please. So each year, the application window opens January 1st and applications are due by March 1st. Applications must be sponsored by an eligible entity such as a land trust or a city government. The project applications are all reviewed by a ranking committee, which is made up of volunteers from our county advisory boards and also technical experts from local, state, and federal agencies. They review the applications, they rank the projects and score them, and then make recommendations to the board, who ultimately funds those projects. And I'd like to take a moment to thank and acknowledge individually all of the volunteers from those committees and agencies who graciously volunteer their time and expertise. So from the Agriculture Advisory Committee, Robert McIntosh is this year's representative. For Storm and Surface Water Advisory Board, it's David Hartley. For the Thurston County Historic Commission, it's Chris Hoffman. From Windermere Real Estate, it's Tanya Hennon. From the Yelm Parks Board, because Thurston County does not have a Parks Board, Ann Warmond. From Thurston Conservation District, Mara Healy. From the Washington State Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, Stephanie Jolivet. From Washington Department Fish and Wildlife, Noel Steinweg. And from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Sam Betances. Next slide, please. So briefly, some statistics on the program. Since 1990, 49 projects have been completed. That's either an acquisition of property or a conservation easement or purchase of development right. That's about $19.3 million that has been awarded and about 5,500 acres that has been conserved. So in the pipeline, which are projects that the Board of County Commissioners has approved, but the projects have not yet completed, we've got 3, which represents another roughly $728,000 in awarded funds and approximately 210 acres that will be conserved when those come online. Next slide, please. Briefly, I'll touch on the ranking criteria that the ranking committee uses in scoring applications. These criteria are set by the Board of County Commissioners. So the ranking committee looks at how well the program fits the objectives of the project, fits the objectives of the Conservation Futures program. They look at how time sensitive is a project, and then what sort of features or habitat would be protected by the property. Perhaps it's got habitat for species that are in our critical areas ordinance. It could have salmon restoration opportunities. Does it have unique natural features such as mima mounds, historic or cultural resources, working agriculture or forestry land? They're looking at what's the nature, or excuse me, what's the certainty the project will be successful given everything they know about the amount of funding that's needed, the level of support, the timing of the project and complexity. And then they're looking at what level of match is provided by the applicants, and does the project include public access. Those last 2 pieces, they're not required, but there are additional points available for projects that are leveraging other funds or have a public access component. And next slide, please. So we only have 1 project application this year. So there's 1 spot on the map there. It's the Hudson Cove project that you can see up on Totten Inlet, and that's sponsored by Capital Land Trust. And next slide. This project is a conservation easement on 228 acres of land. The applicants are requesting up to $1 million in funding. The property is located on the Steamboat Island Peninsula, about 7.5 miles northwest of Olympia. And the property contains, on its 228 acres, about 8,500 feet of marine shoreline on Totten Inlet, about 8 acres of a pocket estuary on the inlet, estuarine and marine wetlands, and then over 9,000 feet of stream bank that runs through the property. And this easement is expected to close at the end of December 2026. Next slide. So here are just a selection of images that show you the property. The map in the upper right, I'm not sure how well you can see that, but the map in the upper right shows the property in red in context with other conserved lands and land that is in public and tribal ownership in the vicinity. The bottom right shows an aerial photograph of the parcels in question. And then the left image is just an image from the water. Next slide, please. This slide is just showing you a variety of pictures that were from either the application or the presentation provided by Capital Land Trust that just give you an idea of the property. All of the ranking was done virtually. We didn't do a field trip this year, so everything was done via Zoom. Next slide, please. So even with 1 project, we still wanted to run the entire ranking process consistent with previous years. So we did have the ranking committee score the project. There's no rank because there's only 1, but the average score given was 42.2 out of 55 available points. And again, the funding request is up to $1 million. Next slide, please. So after the presentation from the applicant, the ranking committee worked on developing options for the board to consider. And so option 1 would be to provide the total 2022 annual allocation, which is $500,000 to this project. That is the preferred option of the ranking committee. Option 2 would be to provide a different amount of funding to the project. The ranking committee did support the board consider additional funding for this project if the board deems that appropriate. Of course, all funding decisions are at the board's discretion. And then option 3 would be to not fund the project. So if the board chooses to award funding to this project, staff will prepare and circulate an award letter for signature. But that concludes my remarks, and I look forward to any questions or direction you have.
Thank you. And Romero, there we go. Perfect. Chris, anything you'd like to add before I go to questions?
No, we are thankful to the board for allowing us to have this particular grant opportunity for the qualified entities. And I do know that although we only received one this year, in years past we have received multiple, so it's not indicative of a typical year.
Okay. Commissioner Edwards, questions?
What benefit could we receive, like, I don't know, spotted frog? I doubt there's any pocket gophers out there.
This particular
Birds or,
project does not overlap with any of the habitat for the covered species in the HCP. However, this particular project would benefit our marine areas, so our shoreline master program it would benefit, as well as salmon habitat recovery areas and protection of stream and water quality.
salmon habitat in there?
Salmon habitat potentially in there, yeah.
Do we know that's, do we know, I mean, is there a stream in there that they're
Andy, do we
spawning
have
fish once in a
information on
while?
that?
I would have to look to see specifically if there is spawning or forage habitat on the marine shoreline, but I do know that there are streams that run through the property, and if the development rights were removed from the property, the water quality in those streams is going to be protected. But specifically, if there are listed salmon using it, I'm not sure. But I do know that the acquisition of marine waterfront is considered a priority of a lot of agencies and groups that work on salmon issues.
How about like a marlet? Is that any nesting area in there?
The marble murrelet, probably not. There is potential, but most of that is further south in the county along the marine shoreline.
Commissioner Menser, questions?
Yes. So I showed my seatmates a different map, Andy, than you had in your packet. It's a little bit like showing the Steamboat Island Peninsula, essentially, just up a level. And I thought it was interesting, and it showed how unique this piece is, relative to the development on Steamboat Island. So that was interesting. Couple of questions, though. So I'll ask, but I think I know the answer. But the recommendation, it said, the ranking committee supports providing additional funds to this project. And I don't think it's been spelled out what that would mean or why that is. My understanding is that they can purchase development rights, but they can't, this money would not allow them to purchase timber rights. So they could stop development on the property, but they couldn't necessarily stop the trees from being cut down, which is, you can see in this map, would be extremely useful and valuable. So correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that's why we might want to consider additional funding. That's what additional funding would go toward. Is that your understanding?
I believe so. The application, the total project cost listed is about $4.2 million, and they're asking for up to $1 million from Conservation Futures to get to that total. My understanding is that total is for the development rights, that the purchase of timber rights would be above and beyond that. I think Capital Land Trust is, if they are able to purchase some of the timber rights with some of those funds, they would do so. But my understanding is that it would require additional funds to do that. As to the ranking committee piece, I tried to keep them at the $500,000. If they wanted to provide the maximum amount of funding, that they picked $500,000 because that's what the board has allocated. And then, on top of that, they recommended more, but that's a board decision. I didn't want them to be looking at numbers that are larger than what the board has allocated. But
do you know why they were thinking about that from their perspective?
I think it's because they see value in the project and realize that applicants have asked for more than what the official allocation would be. So they're asking the board to consider increasing that allocation. But based on past years, we've tried to let their scope be the amount of money that's officially on paper for new projects each year.
Was there any, this might be a Robin question, I don't know, but were there any like return funds from other projects? I know we've had a squirrely few years with COVID and things that we allocated. I remember one of them had to be wholly returned to us, if I remember right. So in looking at our financial plan for Conservation Futures, is there any argument that there's a little extra money there because of the unusual couple of years we've had, or should we be staying within our $500,000 framework that is our kind of guideline?
So there haven't been any recent projects that have, there are a number in the pipeline, as Andy reported, but none of them have come to a point where they say, we're not gonna do this. However, I'm looking at the financial plan, and at the end of this fiscal year.
Could you pull it up? Is there a way that it can be pulled up?
I certainly could, and actually I could just print it out, which would be much easier to read. So I will send to the printer a handful of copies.
Thank you, Brian.
The printer just got fixed today, so let's take advantage of it.
10 minutes.
Yeah. It'll spit out. So in the meantime, I can sign into this meeting and pull it up on the screen. Just take a moment.
Maybe I could ask a couple questions while you're doing that. And the ownership is gonna remain with the seller or the estate, or who's gonna maintain ownership?
Right, so whoever is currently owns the property now, thank you, that the ownership itself will be maintained with that particular person. It'll just be an easement over that property that is overseen by Capital Land Trust.
But just for the development, right, so to
Correct,
speak.
at this time.
So would there be any public access to any of this property?
Andy, was there a proposal for that?
I am not aware specifically if this one has public access. I think it can be a bit more tricky with an easement versus a property that Capital Land Trust owns outright. But any particulars of public access would be included in the conservation easement. Off the top of my head, I'm not recalling specific opportunities for public access from the application.
So we have someone here, yeah.
Oh.
Lawrence, do you mind sitting up here because of the microphone? And if you'll introduce yourself.
Thank you, Commissioner. My name is Lawrence Reeves. I'm the Conservation Director at Capital Land Trust, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. Specific to public access, with conservation easements, the land is still held by a private entity, and so we can't allow, the rights that we're getting in the conservation easement do not allow for public access. It would be just like any other private property in terms of the ability for the public to enter that property.
How about the beach access? How does that fall? Because there's a lot of checkerboard, yes, no, all around. Do you know where that fits?
Yeah, so the 8,500 feet of marine shoreline are all privately owned by that same entity.
So it would say, I don't know, a citizen wanted to go gather some butter clams or something, that'd be a no-go?
It would be just like any other private property. So they could contact that landowner and say, hey, would it be okay if I came and gathered some clams or something like that? But yeah, the easement wouldn't allow anything different than other parcels of private land.
How about the tidal, that fluctuating tide that's where there becomes some real dispute about who is trespassing and who's not.
That's right. So the property does not include any tidelands. even though the parcel line shown on the map is a little wonky, but it's just to the high water mark.
Okay, so the low tide lands then are accessible to the public, is what you're saying?
Well, they're not owned by this landowner.
Yeah.
It might be that they're owned by a private shellfish company, it might be they're owned by the DNR,
Yeah.
I couldn't
Okay,
say.
but as far as you know, it's the high water mark. So,
That's right.
boy, I'd like to know if, I mean, I know there's people out there that would know. I mean, I don't know, maybe the tribe knows. They might gather shellfish out there. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, it's not the sole deciding factor for me, but anytime we spend public money, I like to think about the possibility of public access. And I'm kind of with you, Commissioner Menzer, on that. It looked like there was some taller timber on one of those photographs. I don't know if that would fall under your legacy trees or
These
not.
are privately owned, that's the whole thing.
Well, yeah, if we bought the timber, I got a sense you're thinking about timber rights or something, maybe additional
Well,
purchase or something?
I mean, I just think the more, my point is just that some projects, it's like, there's a purchase price, you pay that, you get that. In this case, there's kind of like, as much money as they can get, they can start to, I mean, I remember Lawrence, you were explaining this to me at one point, but it was like, they could get timber rights around the marine and create a buffer. They could get, they could buy, as much money as they had, they could create benefit by accessing more and more of the timber rights in addition to the development rights. So it's sort of like as much money as they can collect, they can continue to add value to the overall project. It's not just, they need $1 million and that's all they need. And if they don't get $1 million, they can't do anything. They can use pretty much any amount of money toward development rights across all this parcel, timber rights. It's not an all or nothing thing. That was kind of my point. I don't know what kind of trees are on here, but if you've driven by Cooper Point in the last couple weeks and you see how clear cutting a forested area completely transforms a neighborhood, I would hate to see this particular parcel, which stands, I think this map shows, stands pretty uniquely
Sure.
on Steamboat Island Peninsula. I'd hate to see the folks decide to just cut all the trees and sell them.
Right.
We can't do anything about that unless the timber rights are purchased, because that's
But what would be, have you folks looked at that, Lauren, as far as what would the timber be worth if we bought all the timber
Yeah.
as well?
So right now, the plan is that we will have 200-foot buffers on the shoreline, which is in excess of what the DNR would require.
Okay.
And we'll have 100-foot buffers along the non-fish bearing streams. So I feel like even without the timber rights, we still have a high level of protection. The additional timber rights would probably be somewhere in the $6 to $8 million range.
Ooh, boy.
It's, it's, right, it's 200 acres of timber, and some of it is some nice old cedar. I certainly would not like to see that harvested, but, we can only do what we can do with the money that's available.
Is it possible that if this purchase was made as proposed, or this easement as proposed, you'd have ability at some future time maybe to go back? They're talking about logging this portion, and maybe they would sell that timber and leave it standing, I guess.
They definitely would. They have told me that they would sell as much of the timber rights as we could buy. So I think that the challenge is, coming back with a project that's just to extinguish timber rights. I just, in my opinion, it wouldn't rank that well with some of the other conservation grant programs and the competitiveness of them. So that's sort of the challenge that I would see there.
But you guys seek out funding from all sorts of places.
We do, absolutely. We would always be keeping an eye out for some opportunity to continue to protect that timber, for sure.
So you're gonna go out and get another $3 or $4 million besides what we would give you for $500,000.
That's right. If all of our grants come in, as we hope they will, we've applied for 2 RCO grants, 1 grant through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. There's this America the Beautiful funding that has just come up, which is not a great fit, but we're not leaving any stones unturned. If we're successful at raising all the funds we need, I would guess we could extinguish probably half of the timber rights on that property.
As well as the.
As well as the development rights, that's right.
Well, I'm ready to go ahead and do it at least for now, get started with our portion.
I have a question, back to staff, and like, what's the highest score you can get? Because seeing,
55, you see.
55, okay, I didn't hear that, thank you.
No public access probably is one reason why they didn't get 55.
Right.
So Robin was gonna go over this
Back to the-
financial plan.
Yeah,
so-
back to the financial. So, what you see, and if you concentrate on the projected 2022, which is the column with the box, that is the current year. We are on track to collect at least 1.5 million in property tax revenue, so probably a little more than that. And you see the commitments in the fund to fund the debt service on the Cooper Point property that we were talking about earlier today. The transfer to the Parks program for M&O of our current Parks property. Transfer to the Roads program for the maintenance on parks. And then the roughly 758,000 in current projects that the board approved, and 2 million that is set aside for habitat conservation future property acquisition. So if we spend all of that this year, the ending fund balance is anticipated to be 6.7 million. And you see over the next 2 years, we expect to spin that down a little because the board has appropriated next year an additional 1.5 million for habitat, which is a million higher than what is required by the new HCP. But you have a substantial amount in fund balance. And just to meet cash flow, we like to maintain about $500,000 in this fund. So it is well above cash flow.
So when did we decide to put 2 and 1.5 million toward HCP?
Well, there was 1.5 million in the original budget, and the board just approved in the budget amendment an additional $500,000 for this year. The 1.5 million each year in the original budget.
And we're gonna get some of that back, aren't we? I mean, when we do
If it's not
when
spent.
we do mitigation issues, there's gonna be a fee associated.
That will not be, the fee will not be remitted to the Conservation Futures Fund.
Why?
That fee will be remitted to your mitigation fund to be able to use to pay for the ongoing cost of
okay.
maintaining those
But
plants.
we are gonna recoup.
Because
You'll-
we need
you'll
to
get
build an
money.
endowment
Yeah,
for
yeah,
maintaining.
yeah. We're gonna be
You need it.
recouping some of that in that.
I'm just getting confused between what I thought we were just doing in the budget amendment was allocating spending authority for money that had been stockpiled in years past by previous boards.
Well, by stockpiling, if you mean the ever growing
That's-
fund balance,
That's where that money's sitting.
that's, the money is now appropriated,
So
2
like,
million this year for habitat.
so $6 million, let me just finish this thought. $6 million in 2018, that is a function of the fact that for several years, there was no pure grant program.
That's correct.
Okay, so that's that money.
That's the money that's been
Okay. And
piled up.
so when we say we're gonna release 2 million or 1.5, that's because the plan was to spend that 6, 7, 8, now went up almost to $9 million.
Right.
And that's part of spending that on the habitat that we need for the HCP.
That's right.
Okay, so I don't really need to worry about those numbers because that's sort of just, But you're saying even after that expenditure, then it looks like we're stabilized at like 5.7, 5 point, starts to creep up.
Yeah. You've definitely got 5.5 million in fund balance. So the board can choose to, there are a lot of things you can do with this fund. You could choose to spend some of this fund balance on this project. You could choose to save some of this fund balance and increase future years for future projects. You could decide to be more aggressive about buying habitat under the Conservation Futures Plan. You've got lots of options of ways to spend this money.
We need though, I mean, we need some substantial part of this
to go
high
with
fund
the
balance to address the HCP.
I agree.
We built that into the HCP.
Well, what you built into the HCP is an obligation to spend $500,000 a year out of this fund. That's all you built into the HCP.
Oh, really?
You have already gone over and above what you obligated the county to in the HCP.
So when we set, and I'm going to look at Chris, when you guys set the, and I don't even know if it's set in concrete yet, but when you guys set the fee structure that applicants will have to pay for their gopher credits.
Right.
You only factored in that we were going to be adding in $500,000 a year. You did not factor in that we had saved up $6 million.
That is correct. We
Okay.
only
So that
took-
gives us some flexibility there.
Right.
Okay.
How about, you know, no butterflies or anything, but how about spotted frog?
To our knowledge, that is beyond the spotted frog habitat area within Thurston County. So no spotted frogs up there, to our knowledge.
There are listed species.
Yes.
Though, there's,
Yes.
the pocket estuary, the Squaxin Island Tribe has done a number of different research projects, and pocket estuaries are really high-value habitat for juvenile salmonids. And that includes Chinook salmon that they've found that come out of the Nisqually and even as far as the Puyallup River. So this property, particularly that wetland, the pocket estuary does have a lot of benefit and is used by listed salmon species.
Right. That particular area would also potentially be used by migrating birds, and the more area that we can protect, especially in the wetland and estuary areas, the less likely we will have to deal with adding any more species to a habitat conservation plan.
Okay,
So
Commissioners?
the options for the board, as you stated, you can agree to fund as proposed, 500,000, as you heard from Robin. You can go beyond the recommendation, or don't fund it. So those are the three options you have.
I want to fund it, but I don't know how much farther, and I'm not even against going forward with more funding. It's just not in today's setting.
How about 750?
That was gonna ask for a proposal.
Oh, okay, we're gonna dicker now. Okay, I'm with you.
Commissioner Mensah has proposed 750. and
I'm good with it.
I'm okay with that.
Okay, and we take it that you will make good use of trying to protect some of this.
We'll get as much of the timber as we can, and we'll work from the shoreline in. So the most critical part of the timber on that property, we will protect.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
It
you.
is 3:05. We are adjourned.
I didn't know we were gonna be negotiating. I would have got my other negotiating hat.